Well, all right. Good evening. I'm sorry we had some technical difficulties tonight as Facebook and Zoom didn't feel like talking. And so we could not do the live stream in the traditional way, in the way that we wanted to at 6 o'clock. But here we are. We're still here. And so welcome to the fourth and final of this particular series on Be the Change. Many of you know we did, again, the film series, the outdoor film series over the last month or so, and we have accompanied those with these community conversations and forums on various topics. We started out the series just talking about addressing racism. We then went and talked about the criminal justice system, race in the criminal justice system. Last week, we talked about race and socioeconomics. And tonight, we're going to discuss restorative justice, equity, and reconciliation. And I'm actually really excited about tonight's conversation because we have two of my dear friends on this forum, Miss Olivia Abernathy. Olivia is a licensed social worker, master social worker, I should say, and then also a seminarian. She's in seminary right now, and she is a wife, a devoted mother as well, and just a very concerned and involved community member here in Jackson. Also on the call is Pastor William Watson. Pastor Watson is the pastor at Historic First Baptist Church here in Jackson. He is also the moderator for the Browns Creek District Association of Churches, and he's a member of the Jackson Equity Project, which maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And so, Pastor, glad to have you as well. And so, you know, we have been very thankful and privileged to be able to host this series over the last month. It's been a partnership between United Way of West Tennessee, where I get to serve as president and CEO, and also with our Jackson Home and the Jackson Chamber. And so as we kind of, you know, turn the conversation a little bit, you know, tonight, so far over these last few weeks, we have talked a lot, you know, honestly about the problems, the things that we see that are wrong. Not only in our community, but, you know, across the nation, and some would say around the world. But tonight, I'm really excited because I think we're going to spend a bit more of our time talking about the solutions. And so let's begin, Olivia, by just kind of defining some of our terms. And so we chose to call this particular forum to begin with calling it Restorative Justice, Equity, and Reconciliation. I think most people will be more familiar with the equity term and for sure with the reconciliation term. But what is restorative justice?
Yeah, so the concept of restorative justice has really seen a surge lately, especially among the national dialogue around justice, and especially criminal justice. So some of that you probably talked about in that forum. But it's not a new trend. It actually has all of its roots in indigenous populations. So it is a indigenous really way of life or philosophy of thinking about relationships and communities. And so the idea is that there are behaviors, crimes, behaviors that hurt people, that hurt relationships, that hurt communities. And restorative justice is justice that heals. So it's justice that heals those hurts. It aims to repair what harm has been done by behaviors or by people or even generations. And so when we're talking about restorative justice, we're talking about making things right in a way that heals what's been made wrong. And I love that definition because it's just simple. It's simple because when we think about justice practices in America right now, you know, really retributive. It's very harsh punishments. It's, you know, kind of dehumanizing. When you think about the basic human needs are for connection and for belonging. And a lot of our justice practices cut people off from community, and they cut people off from the people that they've hurt, and they take them out of communities, and it's kind of this exclusionary forms of justice, when really doesn't heal, that just furthers the hurt, and it continues the hurt, and it passes that down generationally. And so restorative practices are practices that heal and that bring back that sense of connection and bring back that sense of belonging.
Wow. And so, as we talk about these terms, I think that piece is so incredibly important. One of the things that came up when we were having the conversation about criminal justice, as you mentioned, was that it does seem like there's a lot of retribution, in our current concepts, and not so much, reform. And when we talk about criminal justice reform all the time, and I think most of the time in our minds, we have this idea that we need to reform the system, which is not necessarily untrue. However, what you're kind of speaking of, that restorative justice gets us to think about, how do we reform individuals? And how do we also ask questions like not just what they have done, but what's been done to them? And that's powerful. Again, we've talked before on the series about equity, and about the difference between equity and equality. So, we won't rehash that tonight. But reconciliation, again, we may assume that that's a term that a lot of people are familiar with. But, if they're not, it a lot of times can be a Bible word to a lot of people. And for that reason, it sometimes gets pushed back. I think the most recent conversation that's kind of been happening around that use of that term is to not use it at all, rather to focus on a term like conciliation. And so, Pastor Watson, what's the difference between those two, between reconciliation and conciliation? And then regardless of which one we choose to use, how do they ultimately both point us to our goal that we're aiming for?
Thanks, Matt. I think that is a great question. I've heard some of the conversation about it. That term reconciliation, again, is considered by many a Bible term. It kind of lends its home to 2 Corinthians chapter 5 around verse 18, when it talks about the church being given the ministry of reconciliation, again, as it relates to us sharing the gospel with the world, allowing them to be reconciled to God as sinners into salvation and back into relationship with God. I think it gets pushed back, some because it's a church term. I also think it gets a little bit of pushback because, again, of the relationship of the term as it relates to a reconciling nature, which suggests there was a relationship before it happened. And so I think many are pushing back, especially from our end, from a context of what is Black America, to the conversation of reconciliation is, when did we ever have an equitable relationship in order to be reconciled? And so that's kind of some of the argument when it comes to the word reconciliation over conciliation, which again is coming to an agreement or resolution. But it's kind of hard to come to an agreement and a resolution when you're still seen as probably 3/5 of a man, or you're seen as a commodity, or you're seen as something to be used. So there is difficulty in both words, but honestly, both of them are synonymous with each other if you look them up. They have some commonality. I think the best word that kind of rings both of them together, if you look it up in the thesaurus, is that word harmony. And that is, we should be bringing the racial context and construct of our country, our world, into what is harmony. I've said before that God created us not for chaos, but for community. He understood that, again, there would be differences in his creation because he's the one that made us. He's the one that shaped us this way. And so he shaped us and made us for reasoning of development, interaction, and I always share with the church, interdependence, not independence. I think that's the danger, is that every history provided to us over the course of time, even as we read through and take classes on, shows one trying to be independently dominant over another. And so I think that's a lot of the pushback that comes from reconciliation versus conciliation, conciliation versus reconciliation. And the church, again, breathes reconciliation because it takes its heart back to, well, God formed man from the dust of the ground. Again, he created Adam and he created Eve. He formed Eve, shaped Eve from Adam. And so there's the commonality. And thus, we ought to roll back into this reconciliation because all of us come from the same one. Yeah. But the truth of the matter is sin has disconnected, disrupted, distorted that image within. And so it's, again, us finding that common ground. I think we have to find that common ground in Christ, and community, the larger community, does not have, or they do not have, let me say it that way, the same foundations Christians have when it comes to what is reconciliation and harmony, based on us being etched into the image of God, into the image of Christ. So I think it brings difficulty there.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about, we're not going to curtail the issue of religion and its issues.
Yes.
Some of this too. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So if y'all are watching, if you feel like it's getting too preachy or too churchy, just hold on. We're going to talk about the tough stuff as well. But I really like that you kind of put this emphasis on the term that kind of brings both of those other terms, conciliation and reconciliation, together, is this sense of harmony. And harmony is a musical term, and it's two or three at least different sounds that, again, are distinct but come together to create something beautiful, or what we would say harmonious. And ultimately that is what all of this is about. It's why we're having these forums. It's why we're having these discussions and inviting different people to the table, so that we can hopefully produce and not only produce it internally here, but encourage that type of harmony in our community. But again, to your point that you made on reconciliation and conciliation, Olivia, to your point on restorative justice, they do not permit us to not recognize the injustices. We can't just get to harmony and to reconciliation without first having those tough conversations. One of the things that a passage that's really jumped out to me in the Bible is when the end of John, Jesus confronts Peter, and that's because Peter had denied him. They reconcile, but Jesus addresses it. He addresses the wrong that's been done before they can reconcile. And I think that's important as we continue this conversation this evening, because there's a lot of people who feel like, we ain't got to have the conversation. Let's just get to harmony.
And a lot of times, white people, we can kind of equate reconciliation with just niceness. Like reconciliation just means some kumbaya moment where we're all in the same room being nice to each other. And so I think it's good that we're talking about justice at the same time that we're talking about reconciliation, because it's something has to be made right. And in order for it to be made right, we got to talk about what's wrong. We got to repair the harm that's been done, not just showing up and having coffee.
Yeah, for sure. And so, Olivia, continuing this, talk about restorative justice specifically, one of the areas within our country, at least, where we've seen, a lot of movement, particularly in the area of restorative justice. You had mentioned, our Native American brothers and sisters, but probably the more mainstream version of it is what's been taking place concerning discipline in our schools. And so that's, again, one of the areas you see that term used the most often. So what has this looked like in application, and why is this such an important development? And I'll add even one other question. What does that say about how we as a society, need to be thinking and addressing these things? So first part is the discipline in the schools, what that's looked like, all of that.
Yeah, so first let me say I am not an expert on this at all. I am a social worker just by background. I'm a parent of kids in the school system. I've kind of interacted with a lot of different age groups. We work together at Hands Up Preschool and in higher ed. So I've kind of touched a lot of those bases, but I am no expert. I've not been in the classroom or been an administrator, but I am really passionate about educational justice. And I feel like this piece is a really important piece of that. because it is really important. And, you know, I don't know if y'all talked about this in your other forum, but just the school to prison pipeline and the concept that the criminalization of Black and brown children starts really early. And there's a lot of racial disparities in discipline within the school system that kind of started, you know, harsher discipline in schools was really popular in the 80s and the 90s. And then in the early 90s, this whole zero tolerance policies came to light. And that was in response to emergencies like the Columbine shooting and these school emergencies. And so it was an effort to keep schools safe. But what happened was just this furthering of a culture of really punitive discipline and really like standard punishments for even really small infractions. And so that created culture in schools that has resulted in really horrible racial disparities. And so you have, you know, SROs in schools now, you have police in schools, which was also started to keep people safe. But research has shown that in predominantly affluent or white schools, those resource officers view their job as a way to keep threats from the outside out. And in low income or predominantly Black schools, they see their job as the threats being inside the students themselves. And so you have this culmination of all of these cultures of zero tolerance and punitive justice resulting in the school to prison pipeline. And so it's really important that we talk about where this starts. Mass incarceration starts at the very beginning and in our schools, in our neighborhood schools. And so it's really important. And this has kind of restorative practices in the schools have started to come to light because of those racial disparities. The Department of Education and Justice came out with research that showed zero tolerance didn't work. And so they then sent a letter out to all of the educational state education commissioners to say, you got to get this under control. Like if you don't get this under control and you don't show some less of those disparities in suspension rates and expulsion rates and all that, then we're going to file a suit against you, basically. And some of that started happening. But then what teachers started complaining about is that they didn't have the tools to do anything else. So they felt like they went from zero tolerance to zero discipline, and they didn't have what it would take to manage a classroom, even though those punishments weren't really working in the long run. And so now we've seen this restorative practices, and what that's looked like. All of the experts on this in school settings will say that people want to jump to a program. They want to jump to a 5-step flow chart. What do I do when this happens? Or what do I do when this happens? But the first step is to create a culture. It's to create a school culture that humanizes everybody, that sees students as more than just a brain to educate, but as a whole child. Who comes with a set of stories and experiences and personality and all of those things. So viewing a child as a whole person. And it's creating a culture that's built on connection, care, and repair. And so you want to prioritize relationships between teachers and students and administrators, students and other students. So that you make sure that they have those basic human needs of connection and belonging, that you're prioritizing relationships, and then care, making sure everybody feels responsible for each other in the school, not just their own selves and their own classroom, but everybody has a sort of care for everybody in the building. And then a culture of repair, that when things go wrong, which they will because we're humans, that the standard is that you repair what's gone wrong, that you come back and you make that right. That's just the standard. And recovery from whatever you've done wrong is the norm, that you're not the worst thing you've done. You don't get kicked out, And so the actual practices that have come to that, what that looks like, again, not an expert, I'm not in the actual classroom. But again, this concept of indigenous practices, which is a peace circle. You see this a lot in schools now, where instead of, coming the discipline coming from the top down, you create a circle of the offender and the person who is offended, the teacher, whoever the stakeholders are, and you have a conversation, and you try to create empathy and create a sense of your action had a consequence, and let's talk about what that was, and giving the person that was affected by that a chance to speak. having these circles where you can repair what's been wrong. It also complements this pull towards social emotional learning. And we talked a lot about that when we worked together at Hands Up. Normalizing talking about emotions, normalizing talking about social skills more than just math and history and social studies, but creating an environment where you are teaching the whole child, which is social emotional skills. And then also this, idea of positive behavioral, this PBIS, positive behavioral intervention, that discipline can come. You need more positive conversations, you need more positive reinforcement than you need negative reinforcement. So there's a lot of work being done in all of those areas. But really it's all of the practices that come with creating a culture of connection and of care and of repair rather than exclusionary discipline. Yeah,
that's awesome. And that, I remember when we were working together, that the positive behavior piece, one of the things that I remember reading and talking with our teachers about was that for all of us, we tend to remember more times than not the negative things that are said to us, the negative things that are done to us, more than we are the positive things. In fact, the research shows that you need 4 or 5 positive reinforcements for every 1 negative. And so one of the practices we made the teachers do, and all of us did, and I still kind of wear some of these beads to kind of remind myself, is that we would put on these bracelets or beads, and every time you said a negative thing, you have to change arms. And that kind of was made you stay aware of how positive or negative you were being. And that massively influences how somebody's day goes and the choices that they end up making. But I think the other piece that you kind of talked about that's really powerful is this idea of it's a place, and when we talk about restorative justice, it's bringing the offender and the person who committed the one who's been hurt by it to the table to reconcile there. It's bringing both people to the table, as we talked about a moment ago, as Pastor Watson was discussing, bringing them to the table to have a conversation because they're both human beings and everybody's done something wrong. And so it's kind of finding a middle ground somewhere.
And that might be the teacher. I think sometimes one of the problems is kids don't see their teachers as humans either. And so, having a teacher ask questions and get down to their level and kind of changing those power dynamics to where the teacher can say how that affects their classroom and I also want to note that the most progress that has been made in bringing restorative practices to school systems are parents.
Yes,
so it's not legislative bodies, it's not the school boards, it's not administration, it's parents coming in and advocating and saying, this is how we've experienced, discipline for our kids or kids in their classrooms and advocating for that change. And I think that's important to note when we're talking about communities and what we could do is that you being a parent with a kid in the school system have a lot of power to make change for sure. Absolutely.
And that's bringing, school administrators and others to the table to have that hard conversation and say, how can we be better as a community? And again, finding that middle ground. And so Pastor Watson, that's just it though, right? The whole idea of the middle ground, it seems like in our culture, in our society, in the present age, that doesn't even exist. It feels as though you're not allowed to find middle ground, whether that be in politics or anything else. It feels like so many times that we're all pushed to extremes. So what does it look like for those in our community to stand in the gap and to actually bring people together despite, differences of opinion?
I think, Matthew, one of the things, and again, it's just that pulling together of terms and understanding one another based on the terms that we kind of present and share and use to define our moments. I think when it comes to even finding that middle ground, as was just shared, first you have to understand that the middle ground is desired and it is deserved, not because of anything that has been said, but because most persons are human. It's a human context. And I think it's how we view one another. Do you deserve middle ground? You know, and the truth is, all of us deserve middle ground. Again, that's, not for a preachy moment, but that's the wonderful beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We were undeserving, and he made us deserving because he actually invaded the middle ground. The cross became that middle ground. And so now for us as the church, I say that as a pastor, of course, I know you're not asking for a sermonic presentation, but as the pastor at this moment, but also as an African-American male, as a part of this community, as a citizen of this country. I think everybody has to understand that everybody who lives under the banner and the idea of the experiment of this republic that we call America deserves middle ground. Again, the ideals, as I shared on this past Sunday, that we often share as a country, that we trust in God we trust is on our monies. The truth of the matter is sometimes, even in our community, we want to ask the question, which God do you trust in? Based on how you respond, how you react, how undeserving you feel we are of just even a space and a voice in the conversation. And so I think it's going to become more of an opportunity for us, but also I think it's going to become more of an opportunity for even the predominant culture to really make the decision to find middle ground. Because again, it's a matter of deserving. One saying, do you deserve this ground? And the other saying, do we deserve to give you time to give us this ground? We just gonna take this ground, we're gonna keep this ground, versus saying, the ground doesn't belong to either one of you. The ground belongs to the one who created. And he created, again, back to the term, for the purpose of harmony, for the purpose of all strings being tied together to make a beautiful presentation, whether it's tapestry, whether it's music. I think for us coming together and finding that middle ground is going to be resigning to the fact that we own the ground. That's again the first thing, resigning the fact we don't own the ground. We don't let me say, I'm trying to word it the best way I can in my little thought process. In a sense, like I said, we don't own the ground. We don't dominate or dictate what happens on the ground. We carry out, again, what has been created and the environment that has been provided for us to work within. That's another context of that reconciliation. I think we just have to come to the table with open hearts, open minds. I enjoyed Sister Abernathy, she shared about the peace circle. But often in my home, before we came to the peace circle, we had to find the punitive circle.
Right.
Because some of us had to be brought to the table in the sense of making sure we're going to sit down, whether it was brother or sister, whether it was community friend or whatever, we had to be brought to the table and then have that discussion. And I think everybody has to find that place within them that breathes humanity and just shares the fact that, hey, this ground we don't own. This ground we were afforded by grace, by opportunity, whatever people want to call it in their own different terms. And we should come to this ground ready to, again, understand that all of us matter in making this life a success. We can spend our time fighting back and forth. We can spend our time pointing fingers back and forth. But the truth of the matter is, when we come to the ground, we have to determine at the ground, we're going to deal with honestly what has taken place and walk away with the very fact that we all deserve, again, to be treated with respect. We all deserve to be treated with love. We all deserve to have, again, those certain inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah. Well said. Well, as we, kind of transition to the back half of the questions tonight, one of the things that we wanted to do, so many times as we've hosted these forums, live streaming them here on Facebook, we would get questions that would be put in the box, in the chat box, and people say, can you address this? Can you talk to that? And, unfortunately, a lot of times we run out of time. And so this being kind of one of our, our last sessions, we want to make sure that we try to go back and address some of those questions that the audience had posted. And so, again, since tonight we're trying to talk about solutions, one of those questions was, we know that racial superiority and racial injustices exist. In fact, we've lived it, this person writes. My question is, how do we move forward? Not discounting our past and what has happened, but creating a better environment for all of us to coexist peacefully with equal opportunities and true justice. So Pastor Watson, why don't you swing at that first, and then Olivia, you come up to bat right after.
Okay, we're gonna swing at that one more time. Give me the gist of what you want me to ask.
So I think this person was asking, we know that these injustices have taken place.
Yes.
People of color have lived it. But what really truly is the way forward, I think they're asking. How do we as a community, and I would say as a Jackson community, specifically for our community, how do we move forward? And as they say, moving forward by, creating a better environment to coexist peacefully, and to have equal opportunity.
I think, again, it goes back to what Sister Abernathy said, even what my last statement was. We have to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I think the ability to move forward has to be built on the platform of honesty and integrity and a willingness to actually look at, face down what our past really was, and what our past did, and how it affected the people that were a part of it. Because the same past that affected them in real time is affecting us now, because we're living out the dehumanizing actions of the past. And so we have to be willing to be honest about it. We have to be willing to have a true dialogue about it. Mm-hmm. And I think she shared, Sister Abernathy, earlier, that most people want to have coffee, smile, and just move forward and talk about something else. Well, let's go ahead and move forward. Let's do it. Let's just have justice. Let's just be nice. Let's just treat each other well. When the truth of the matter, in me there is hurt. In me there is pain. In me there is a voice that has not been heard. In me there are actions that happen to me or happen to people around me that you don't want to be honest about or admit. And the truth of the matter is, we talk about it all the time, but most people don't do it. What if it happened to you? What if you were driving and were pulled over and were threatened? What if you were running and being chased? What if you were just walking home as a child? And I understand those with children. What if? I think most people don't put themselves in those positions because they never had to. And most people don't want to put themselves in this position because they don't want to, because they feel they would never have to be in that position because they will always be on top. And I think that creates the attitude and the atmosphere for the consistency of not even reaching equitableness or equality or fairness in a community, because there are people who don't want to. But for those who do, we have to change the air and the environment. I think Sister Abernathy alluded to that. We have to change the air. We have to change the environment. I learned a long time ago from one of my mentors about pastoring. He said, if you want to be an effective pastor, if you want to be a pastor that creates change and opportunity for the people that come into the fellowship, into the flock, he said, never spend your time fighting with goats. Pastor the sheep. Because sheep will change goats. But if you spend your time fighting with the goats will end up changing the sheep. And so you have to be careful to spend your time being honest about the moment, dealing with it with the people who are being honest about the moment, and then walk in it. I heard someone share one time that I don't see color. And I kind of wrestled with that for a moment because I really wanted to say you're a lie. Yes, you do. If you don't see color, that means you're color blind. We need to get you some of those glasses that you put on that shows you that there are multiple. God made color. It's beautiful. What we have done is taken color and made it commodities. We've used it that way. But all of us have strengths that build one another.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something that I have that my white brothers and sisters and Latino brothers and sisters and Hispanic brothers and sisters and Asian brothers and sisters and all the other demographics need. There's something that they have that I need that makes us whole. And we are always the worst when we determine and count out another race, another generation, another group of people. We're always the worst. And one has said it best that if we don't look at our past and be honest about it, we are doomed to repeat the failures of our past because we just won't be honest. So again, I think if we're going to actually move forward, and be happy and be, as whatever they want to be, then you got to be honest about it. I mean, because right now, even in this present climate, we're not happy. But there are other people that want us to be happy as if to say we're further along than we were before. Well, I would say to that, we ought to be. In the country that we're in, we ought to be further along, but just because we're further along, do we become satisfied and pacified to the moment? Or do we know within us that there is more required of us? Not just because of humanity, but because of the image of God that has been etched in us that won't let us rest to know that we are treating our brother and sister wrong.
Yeah, for sure. Olivia, what would you add to that?
All of that. Mark Charles, he talks a lot about how you can't build community if you don't have a common memory. And so that's exactly what you're saying. Of like, we don't have a common memory. And people say, this is how I've experienced America. And people say, no, you don't. No, you haven't. And you can't build community when there's not a common understanding of where we've been and where we are and what's happening. And I think part of white culture, honestly, is to jump to doing. What do I do? Who do I write a check to? Where do I volunteer on my Wednesday during the lunch hour? Like, just tell me what to do. And that's really out of an effort to not have to interrogate anything, to really assuage guilt and to feel better about all of our brothers and sisters of color being not happy, and to make us feel better about that. We just want to do something. And I love Austin Channing Brown says that anti-racism work is being better humans to other humans. And so I think that, like, for white people, the first step is to being better humans, and it's interrogating who we are. And that requires a lot more work than writing a check or showing up to a meeting. That requires a lot of introspection. That requires a lot of deep internal wrestling and repentance and honesty. And then, only then can you show up in the right way. Because doing on a Tuesday morning doesn't follow you in your neighborhood when there's police brutality and you have to show up and be courageous. But being a better human does. Doing on a Wednesday afternoon doesn't follow you into your business meetings or your boardrooms where you have to decide, is my bottom line more important than the good of my neighbor? It's really having to be a better human and recognize that we do need each other and we are all interconnected. And if I'm living my life in a way where I don't have to wrestle with those things, then I'm living my life in a way that says, I don't need them. I don't need these people or those people. And so I think part of moving forward is recognizing that we all have a collective hurt that we all need to be healed from. And that looks different for different people, but being better humans is going to require a lot more than just adding a slot on your to-do list. It's a way of life. Yeah,
absolutely. Ooh, ooh, see, y'all see out there, this is the reason why I asked both of these two to be on here. I could bottle up both them answers and sell it. You know, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. And yeah, I think, you know, it's this sense of the collective has to be more than the sense I have for the individual, and that we are truly better together. The BDI Yimwile said once at a conference that I attended, he said, you know, the thing about, you know, reconciliation or about justice or about, you know, all of us as just human beings being at the table. You know, he said that the thing is that, you know, pastors, you were saying, we didn't create ourselves, you know, but we didn't create anything in this world. But look at the flowers. Look what we do with flowers. We say that a rose costs $5.99. We say that a tulip costs $3.99. I'm making it up. We say that this other thing, this like, you know, little shrubbery is $1. But when God made all those things, he just called it good. That's all that he said. He just looked at it all and said it was good, that it was beautiful just the way he made it. And we treat people that same way. We look at somebody and we put a value tag on them that God never did. And until we get to that place, you know, Olivia, as you said, that we're actually treating one another as humans, first and foremost, as brothers and sisters in this creation. Until we get to that point, we're going to have these problems. And so the way forward in our little old Jackson community is the first and foremost, just start treating each other as brothers and sisters, as fellow humans on this journey. Now that being said, you know, we said we also, you know, we done got a little preachy tonight, but we got to also address some of them elephants in the room, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, when we think about the systems that have been in place, systems that we value, like colleges, you know, police units, churches, and again, these are all questions from folks we got in the audience. You know, when we think about those types of institutions, colleges, police, churches, you know, many of whom people have been hurt by, do we reform them or do we abolish them? You know, that's been, you know, one of the heavy conversations going around the country. You know, defund the police, get rid of, you know, these fraternities or sororities or colleges, or, you know, cancel these churches, you know, all that type of language. And they say, the person asked the question, since we know historically and presently, churches are segregated, police originated to catch slaves, and now you have this continued police brutality that we see in places or all across the country. Colleges have discriminated, but now have legacies of discrimination, even though at the same time they can also help with access. So, you know, again, the question is, do we reform these institutions or do we abolish them? Ooh, I gotta tell you which one to go first. Nobody want to go first? Y'all ain't gonna step up?
I'll yield to Sister Abernathy because I see she's jumping at the bits to grab the first piece of this question. So go ahead and yield. I have a response, but I want to yield.
Okay. We believe you.
Because I went first the last time. So
okay. Ladies first. Look, ladies first.
Yeah, ladies first.
Honestly, I don't know. You know, that's a really complex, that's a huge question to talk about. Do we keep trying or do we start over? But what I will say is that COVID has halted us enough that we have the space to have an imagination. Like we're going to have to redefine the church. Like we're going to have an imagination for what the church is, because right now churches aren't meeting and it's going to look different. Churches are going to die from this. Like there's going to be something that's dead and there's going to be something that's resurrected from that. And then same with colleges and same with, you know, schools, like, you know, as far as testing it, we don't test. So now we have this space to kind of think about, what do we want? And we're going to have to be creative, because I feel like right now what we're doing is we're just kind of trying to clear away all the cobwebs. I have a friend who says, like, stop trying to clear away the cobwebs and kill the spider that made them, and so I think we have this space right now for people in all areas, in business, college, criminal justice, all of these things, to stop and say, okay, as an entire world and a country, we're at a stopping point. So let's get creative and let's think about what this means. And in terms of like police, and people don't like talking about abolishing the police at all. But thinking about restorative justice, where do we put our chips into things that heal? Like what services or what spaces are healing, and how do we put more of our chips in that areas that are restoring the breaches, repairs of the breach? I just think about, we have this space now to be creative. It's hard, this is really hard for everybody, and I think everybody's feeling a collective loss and a collective disorientation, but it's also could be incredibly revitalizing for so much. It's a real turning point.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think you're right. So many in our culture have talked about this idea of using this opportunity to pivot, to change course, or even, this language of like not going back, to maybe some of the way that things were. So yeah, absolutely. Just, a culture of reimagination. Pastor, what would you add?
I would say the same. It's reimagining, in many ways, reimagining our America for what it really is, and what it's always been. It's always been. People suggest that we are becoming a greater melting pot. Well, we've always been a melting pot. The world has been a melting pot. And so again, we can reimagine or re-envision what we need to, again, shape and reshape. One of the things I would say when it comes to reform, again, when it comes to reconciliation, the question is what it has been. And then you're talking about reforming. What are you reforming it to if its roots had always been this type of look when you talk about the policing system? I would say remaking it into what we desire for it to be, and that is not a controlling unit, but an opportunity for safety when necessary. But I also believe in the context, because when they talk about the defunding of the police, as it has been talked about from our context, it was never to, again, abolish the police totally, in the sense of what people are trying to use and politicize it for. Because again, in this highly overly politicized age, everything is taken from one side to the other, depending on which channel of news you watch and which podcast you listen to and all of that. But it was never meant to take money and destroy and obliterate the police, as much as it was, as was just shared by Sister Abernathy. Where are our chips better served? Our police force doesn't have to be as massive if we have clinical psychologists to deal with those who are dealing with issues that are of mental arrest. We don't have to have a massive police force if we have a children's services that's properly funded and skilled in order to handle what are behavioral issues. Because all of that stems from, again, the injustices. You have behavioral issues because, especially in our areas, because of the lack of. And then you can throw it on the other side in some ways, not just African Americans, but there are Caucasians and others who have lack of resources. But then on the other side, for the elite and for those few who are African American, who are elite, you have that context of that idea that we need them to save us from you. One of the things, even with the argument of bringing harmony to both of our races again, is the fact that there is this idea that when they suggest, I believe sociologists, scientists suggest that the population will be more predominantly of color than it will be of Caucasian Americans, there's a fight to hold on to, again, that conversation of middle ground, that space What would we do? Let's change the laws. Let's put as many conservative judges or liberal judges, whatever you want to do, whatever your side is. Let's put all this in place, and let's provide some type of firewall that keeps us safe on the other side of when this happened. My mama shared it this way. That's the best person I can quote at this time. My mama said, she said, the reason why it will not be the way it is because we weren't raised that way. For the most part, in the African American community, we weren't raised to be oppressive.
Right.
One, because we were always oppressed. So we were raised with a different type of politeness. I was raised to speak to everybody when I walked through. I was raised to open the door, do all of these things. I was raised to do that. I was raised to say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, not because it's a white slave term, because it was just the right thing to do. You're a woman, yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. But then others would tag these forms to it, where saying yes, ma'am means you're bowing to this master, and saying yes, sir means you. No, it's just I was raised that way. So I don't have that nature to be able to wrestle. So when you talked about reforming, I would say remake it. And remake it with a heart that has everybody inclusive. When it comes to the church, the same way, as Sister Abernathy says, reimagining. Now, here's what I think will always be the issue of that. I don't know if we would ever have a full, what people call multicultural church setting. I don't know. Because I do know people love different rhythms. So everybody has their own rhythm, their own cadence.
That's a nice way of putting that.
Their own
Just a way.
So there's a different cadence. I think the gospel draws who it draws, and sets who it sets. Here's what I believe. I believe that we are, again, churches that are bastions of hope, that are forts that God has placed within the life of this community to save, to rescue, to help develop, to help, again, enrich and empower. And so God assigns. And so whether he assigns a full multicultural setting, whether he assigns a all African-American, all Caucasian, all Latino, that segregated moment should not define the culture we walk out into if we are talking about, in those moments, the same God and the same Christ and the same person of the Holy Spirit. I think they define those moments now because when we're in our own huddles, we don't interpret the text the same way. We put our varied spins that keep us in positions of power or keeps us in positions of grabbing for power versus, again, talking about a God who is all inclusive.
Yeah.
So I think that's what makes churches segregated. And so that comes back to the term of reimagining. Because for someone to share with me, when I was talking in class, in school, someone would say, this is theology, and then there is such thing called Black theology.
Right.
And so my suggestion to that point is, so what makes your theology the theology?
Exactly. Right.
What makes your interpretation the weight? Well, I've studied Hebrew and Greek. Well, so have we. So what makes your, so again, it's that elitist conversation that we have to diffuse. That keeps churches wrestling for identity when they should already have clear relevance, because the church is never irrelevant.
Right. And that talk of elitism, let me go ahead and ask this question. That's one of the concerns that even people watching this video have, and people in the community who will not watch this video because of that, that whole perception of elitism, that, we're just talking heads that are getting up on here on Facebook. We got our college degrees, we got this other stuff. We're leaders in the community, whatever they, might be the thought. And they go, yeah, but what are you really doing? Or how does this help the individuals who are living this every day? How does this format even How does this conversation, any of that, how does this help what's going on? Do we have the intention of actually serving people in the community? Those would be the questions that some would ask. Olivia, would you start? What would you say to that?
I think about, I'm a social worker. I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think about the fact that there's a lot of people who don't have those really basic needs for, provision and security met. And so to talk about higher order things like this is not something that they want to or can or even have a desire to, but the people that do, that again is a privilege that we can leverage. And if we can talk about how to be better humans to other humans, then we can possibly create an environment where people's basic needs are met, and then they can flourish to be able to think about higher order things. And so this is not just so we can talk about stuff and feel smart and whatever. It's so that we can actually create an environment in which people can then flourish to how they're meant to be flourished. Because all people are meant to be able to connect and to think creatively and to imagine. And so we need to be able to leverage what we have to create an environment in which that can be true.
Yeah. And so that makes me think, there was this quote that I read years ago, that a man who's in the middle of the war cannot consider the stars. He's not looking up at the sky when bullets are going over his head, thinking about constellations. He's not thinking about Mars and Jupiter. He's focused fully 100% on his survival in that moment. And I think that, to the person who asked that question, that's where it is a fair question. There are people who feel as though they're living in a war zone. People in this country who are in certain communities living in war zones. And Olivia, as you said, the problem that persists, unfortunately, is that we have, though there are people like us who often don't find ourselves in those positions, but yet here we are trying to speak that message to other people who don't find themselves in that position, because they hold the keys to unlock the doors to change that scenario, to change that in our communities. And that is one of the, I think would have been one of the primary motivations for me, and even working with others to start this series and to start this conversation, to even start the Jackson Equity Project, is to get those individuals who have some of the keys to those doors to say, brother, can you put it in the lock? Can you turn the key? Can we open the door? Because we need to allow these people to run in, because if they run in, it benefits all of us. Like all of us, we as a community will be better. And so, Olivia, I agree with you. I think we have to have the conversation, because maybe the conversation will bring some people to the table that otherwise might not have come, and they might have that key to unlock that door. Pastor Watson, anything you would add to that?
I would say the same. Ditto to both. One of the things that the vision of our church is to be a key in the life of this community, unlocking people's hearts and minds to the power potential that God has invested in them to the glory of God, which means our responsibility, again, is not to guard the door, because, again, when Jesus arose, I think he says, I've been given all power, I've been given the keys. Mm-hmm. In one sense, I think that's what the term of the text is, I've been given the keys. And so then he hands off the keys to the apostles, and the apostles to those who are receiving salvation. And so we have the keys with the opportunity, going back to that 2 Corinthians 5 passage of ministry of reconciliation, to open up, to exchange people's sins and brokenness and hurt for the grace of God. And so a practical conversation in this community is the same way. We've been given keys in certain positions, in certain places, the police, politicians, churches, school systems, all of that. We've been given keys to unlock the lives and hearts of people in order that they might have an opportunity to the access that we've been afforded. Now, for me, I grew up in one of those communities. I'm a transplant to Jackson from Memphis, Tennessee. So I grew up in those communities.
North Memphis.
Yeah,
North
yeah.
Memphis.
So I'm saying I grew up and had a little bit of South Memphis in me too. So I grew up piping in, and I shared it with the church, and I'm not embarrassed about it because there were times when we had to struggle. I grew up with having to extend an extension cord from our house to the house across the street that would possibly have caused a fire. We didn't know anything about that stuff, but we didn't have lights. And it was in between bills. My mother and father did the best they could. They raised 3 children, and that's not half of as many as some others have had.
Yeah, yeah.
But again, I grew up in that environment. And so I'm also a testament to the fact that if you, again, are responsible with the time and you don't allow it to defeat you, but you begin to handle and hold it responsibly, then you can walk on the other side of what is devastation, what is a deplorable condition, because we had to do all of that. We had steaks and stuff like that. I didn't grow up in that type of lifestyle. I didn't know how to use utensils like that until I got old. At the table with somebody else, they're like, "No, you use this fork and this," that type of thing. My mama taught us well. My daddy taught us well. They took care of us. They provided for us, but we didn't always have. So I say to the person who asked that question, listen, I understand. I really do. And on the other side, I'm thankful that my parents did not succumb to stereotypes or they did not succumb to the pressure of saying, I give up, I quit, the system always gonna be against this, this, and this. But they found their niche and they developed and carved out a way to raise children in order for them to carve out a way. Now I have a brother who is one of the high-ranking officers in the Coast Guard. He's the captain of the sector commander rather in the Coast Guard, New Orleans sector, oversees that area. Worked at the White House, all of that type of stuff. I got a chance to go to the White House because he was working at the White House because he worked for the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jeff Johnson, and General Kelly for me. And so we never thought when we were huddled in our little home that these were things that we would be able to achieve. Myself, even pastoring in the city, the doors that we're opening here, my sister working for the IRS, bless her heart, working for the IRS.
Right.
So I share with people who say it cannot be achieved. Yes, it can. But you have to fight the inner you that says, the system won't let me be successful, because you have to also, and this is my preaching moment, the system does not control your success. God does. Now, whether you believe in God or not, that's your thing. I'm gonna share that with whoever watching. God, He's already invested in you tools and gifts. It's up to you now to take those tools and gifts and reinvest them in ways that help you and help others to become successful. Because the other thing is, we got to this point by being givers. Yeah. You got to be able to give of yourself to really enjoy these moments. And that's what I say when we talk about reconstructive racial reconciliation. At some point, all of us are going to have to give. Yeah. At some point, everybody's going to have to give. Everybody's going to have to say, you know what? I ain't taking nothing else. I'm at the table now. What can I give to this moment? And I believe when we get to that point where we say, what can we give? Then God will open up that opportunity for us to be successful.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's important for people listening to recognize the fact that not everyone has access to these circles, and to, people like Tangible Action Steps. I think to do a power inventory, to consider all of the spaces in which you hold the keys. What spaces do you inhabit that you have power over, or that you have influence over, and write them down. Like, really sit down and write them down, and think about the ways that you can show up in those spaces and give, and what can you give, and what resources you have. And that's the kind of work that it takes, is to sit down and be honest about those things. School, church, boardrooms, all kinds of areas that we have influence over. And then how can you leverage that power to the betterment of your community and to the betterment of the people, not just people that look like you, not just people that you run with,
Exactly.
not just people that you care about, but everybody. And how can you leverage what you have so that people that don't have access to this right now will, like this time next year?
Yeah.
I agree.
That's
I
good.
agree. I agree.
That's good. Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. Those are the tangible steps that people need, to say, I think all of us have gotten the question, like, where can I start? Like, where do I start in this work? And Olivia, I think that's a great place. And I think that can go both ways. And I think, Pastor, that's what you were, highlighting as well. On the one side, Olivia, you're 100% correct. Those of us who have leadership positions or who have some level of power, and most of us, we question that. But again, as you mentioned, that may not be the power that you think you should have, or the power or even what you perceive to be power. But if you will actually take that self-inventory, you'll probably be surprised of where it is that you can personally give. But then, Pastor, as you said, on the flip side is for other folks who feel as though that they're lacking power, don't let that lack of power hinder you. Don't let it keep you from dreaming of something better and what can be. Like, you have to keep on pushing. You have to keep moving ahead. And the beauty of this moment is that our hope is that if folks on one side will recognize the power that they have, take those keys and begin to lock the doors. And on the other side, the people who are trying to walk the doors but are so tired, if they'll just keep on walking, that those two will just meet somewhere in the middle.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what we want.
Exactly. Because there's always been this conversation of they won't let me have. And then there's always been the conversation of they don't need. So then there's the power broker that says they don't need nothing else. And then there's the conversation on this end where they ain't gonna give me, or they don't need, or I'm not going to, or they are controlling. When in all of us there is advancement. There is advancement. We see now, whether political, I'm not, Republican, Democrat, whatever. I'm just saying, when you talk about the issue of how much do we need to infuse into unemployment. The question is very difficult, literally, for many, because for the majority of them, none of them have never been unemployed.
Yeah.
So now you're making decisions about unemployment, and you've never been unemployed, and then you're being employed with the taxes of the people who are unemployed and employed.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the conversation of healthcare. Well, I don't think they need this type of healthcare, but you have a healthcare plan that is so A1 that it doesn't matter what happened to you, you are covered. But we're trying to figure out we're trying to figure out the best plan on the best tier. I think we are sometimes or we think we are, or try to be so far removed from an issue to not think about it, that Sister Abernathy said, that we just stop entertaining it and just, it's whatever. I think we and she shared this in her opening communication, I forget which question, but she shared it. We need to have sympathy and empathy. Which is something that as a country, as a race of people, all races of people, we're kind of losing with one another. I don't want to sympathize with you nor empathize with you. I really don't care. That's what most people, I really don't care. And when you get to that point, it's going to be destructive, everything after.
Yeah, for sure. Most definitely.
And so, I think we just have to be, again, we just have to be thoughtful. I mean, it's work. And we have to be willing to get up and put the work in. We have to get up every day and say, you know what? I want to be a better me so that we can be a better us.
Yeah, for sure. So as we get ready to wrap up, last question, and Olivia, you touched on this, and you already gave one great example. But what are those tangible things that people in our community can do. You know, you gave one. Start by just recognizing the power that you do have and the places where that power exists, and where you can begin to, you know, have influence there and unlock the door for other people. But what are other things? What are other tangibles, you know, for our community? Anybody?
Oh, I thought you said Olivia when you started. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I didn't know.
Yeah, go ahead, Olivia. I did say Olivia, but
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of work to do. There's room for all of us to do the work because there's a lot of work to do. And I think just in line with doing an inventory of where you have power, doing an inventory of what your lane is. You know, we all have a lane. You know, all of us we're churchy on here, you know, but we also have other lanes and we have other passions and we have other resources. And so you don't have to do everything, and none of us can. So we're gonna get too tired to try. But find your lane and start going and start learning and start listening and start figuring out what you can leverage and what you can give. But it's figuring out, you know, what part do you play in this and what sphere? Because there's plenty of spheres and there's plenty of circles where change is needed. And so it's finding that and then dedicating yourself and doing the work.
Yeah. And I think that's important, is that we all do have our lane and you know, to go back to that middle ground, the problem is that we often want to take somebody else's lane, or run it. You know, we might not even want to take it permanently. We want to run it for a little while, or whatever the case may be. But if we can run this race next to one another, supporting one another, you know, we're going to end up with better outcomes. And so, yeah, I think that's great. Pastor, what would you say? What are the tangible things?
Yeah, I would go back to even what Sister Abernathy said about the lanes and about just knowing and getting and understanding who you are. It is knowing your capacity, knowing the capacity that has been given you. Again, I'm sorry for the preaching moments. I'm going to start reading other books so that y'all won't be mad at me later on in life. But when Jesus talks about the parable of the talents, and he gives the 5, he gives I think it's 2, and he gives the 1. He gave to each, in my estimation, based upon the capacity that he knew they could handle. But also, I believe he gave to them based on what he desired for his own kingdom. Everybody's not going to be a 5-talent person. Everybody's not going to be a 3-talent person. Everybody's not going to be 100, whatever it is.
Right.
But the 1-talent person can't look at the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5 and say, you know what, God did me wrong. Because the truth of the matter is, working that 1 talent provides for you the success that is necessary based on your capacity. Because you can't, I mean, God knows what we can handle, number 1.
Right.
So I'd say, again, as Sister Abernathy said, reduce all of this rhetoric, all of this outside noise down, and find out who you are and how you come or how you add to the table of life for yourself and those who are around you.
Yeah.
The other tangible moment I would say is, again, once you find out who you are, begin to invest that in your lane, into life, in a way that, again, it benefits and not hoards. I think most people are every man for themselves these days. I think COVID, as she shared, has put us in a position where we got to reimagine some stuff now. Because again, there are people who have now had to depend on resources they never had to before. There's some people who had to go to RIFA that never had to go get a food bag ever in their life. There are people who've had to go to the clothes closet, Goodwill. They're no longer able to shop at Macy's or whatever. And so they believe that has reduced them down to less than human, because they probably always thought only people of meager means are supposed to be in these places. So God has so reworked the order in such under COVID that we need to reimagine the fact that everywhere is still good ground. I mean, Goodwill is not any less than or any more major than. It is a place where we can receive what we need in those moments. Right. So for the person that shop at Goodwill, the person that shop at Macy's, the only difference is what you paid for it.
Right. And that goes back to your talent. The talent illustration is that it ain't about what talent you got. The person who got 5 talents ain't no better than the person who got 1. It ain't that ain't the market of value.
Exactly. I don't believe Matthew and Mark are fighting with Paul right now over the fact that they only had the opportunity to write 1 book. I don't think, you know.
Right.
But again, even in my own life, I'm not fighting with my brother, nor am I fighting with you, Matthew, or Sister Abernathy, because of what God has allowed you to achieve based on personal, practical, invested gifts. What I am doing is celebrating them and partnering with you, because as I partner with you, then from there, all are able to be benefited. I think this is what this forum tonight has presented, an opportunity for us to see again that differences in color does not always equate to differences in heart. And I think we more so see that when we walk out. They don't care about us. They don't care about us, you know. But the truth is, within all of us, there's the capacity to care if we choose to. It depends on how we look at one another, how we treat one another. So again, going back to that point, I think the tangible moments are the ones we make based on what we know about ourselves and where we know we link up in this society. And we can do it make better.
And I think that's, you know, that's what's so hard about all of this and about, you know, people wanting tangible steps, is that honestly, the first tangible step begins with you. It just begins right at home with you. And Olivia, as you said, for every single one of us to take that personal inventory, no matter the color of our skin, no matter where we live, no matter the job we have, any of those pieces, to begin by taking that, you know, that personal inventory and just figuring out, where am I on this walk of life? You know, where am I? And where's my brother or my sister? And how can I be of aid to them? You know, I think that, again, we've said, you know, every person on here is a person of faith. I think that that's been probably one of the most challenging things for people like us, but really for all people. And for those who, you know, even as we address the elephant in the room about how the church can be better at all of this, the thing I feel like so many have forgotten, the greatest commandment, love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that that's where our culture, you know, that's where they look at the church and are disappointed, because they hear some of the rhetoric coming out of certain circles that says love God, but it don't say anything about loving your neighbor. And that is, as we're closing tonight, the tangible steps. You know, get right with the Creator, get right with your fellow brother or sister. That's what ultimately this life is about, like living, again, walking beside one another for our mutual benefit, our mutual gain, our mutual success, you know, loving one another towards that. So to those of y'all who have been out here, I hope y'all hung in with us on this forum. I don't know how you could not have with these two on here. Incredible evening tonight. And so please go and share these forums with other people, not just this one, all of them, with people that you know that need to be a part of this conversation. Take that personal inventory, see what lane you're running in and where you can be of service and help the community. And it may be just that, starting with sharing these videos, starting with conversations. Maybe you've been afraid to have a conversation about this. The very first night when we opened up these forums, we discussed how, you know, there's certain things you don't talk about, and we politics, religion, and race, and we done talk about all three tonight. So you know, so don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. We'll walk alongside you in that. But that's just it. You know, we're trying to find that middle ground for our community, for the Jackson community, because everybody on this call, everybody that's been on any of the other calls, so many other people working behind the scenes. But those of you watching and everybody else loves Jackson. We love this community. So let's work together to make it better. All right. Thank you, Pastor Watson. Thank you, Sister Olivia. I really greatly appreciate it, and it's been a privilege to be on with you guys tonight. You know, we'll figure out another way to do this again, some other format, hopefully after COVID-19 in a real room, in a real space, but who knows? So we'll keep working towards that. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good night, everybody. We'll see you soon.